Now, I was talking this morning about Chinese ideas of the law of nature and showing that they didn't conceive nature as following laws, but that there nevertheless is in nature a principle of order that is wuzi, that is to say illegal, and yet orderly. And I tried to suggest the various ways in which we could somehow apprehend, and I use that word advisedly rather than comprehend, some way in which we can apprehend what they mean by order through this term li, which originally meant the markings in jade, the grain in wood, and the fiber in muscle. But that the principle of order in nature, the organic patterns in which nature plays, are never able to be completely reproduced in mechanical terms. And the reproduction of the patterns of physical nature in mechanical terms is what our forefathers meant by explanation in the West. Unless you could explain it in those terms, well, you hadn't really explained it. And so too, in the whole academic world of the West, that which cannot be written down and discussed in an accurate way is not matter for academic learning. This, of course, is a very limited point of view, because the world that can be described is never the same as the world that exists. The described world and the real world are incommensurable, and one must never lose sight of that. Otherwise you start eating the menu instead of the dinner, and swallowing the money instead of what it can buy. And people characteristically do just that. So therefore, the people who have been hypnotized and bewitched by words have to be dehypnotized and come back to the world in which we live. Now you see, we call this world in which we live the physical world or the material world. And that bugs people who are what I call spiritual types. They want to find behind the material world, which changes and perishes, the spiritual world which is more real and which endures forever. But they get so fouled up because they're exactly backwards. The material world is a world of pure abstraction. Physical world, as we use this word, is a completely abstract creation. It is not concrete at all. That may surprise you, but a little investigation into the origin of words will show you conclusively that this is so. How does a scientist treat what he calls the material world? Answer: by quantitative methods. How do you establish quantity? By measure, by number, by representing nature in terms of abstract categories. Meters, inches, seconds, degrees, and so on, all of which are as abstract as the lines of latitude and longitude. And the word material goes back to the same word as meter, the metered world, the measured or measurable world. And that in turn leads back to the Sanskrit word matra, that root from which we derive maya or illusion. So also I explained to you when discussing nature that one of the great meanings of nature in the West is classification. What is the nature of this thing? In Greek, physis, hence our physics. Physis has to do then with the world as apprehended in a certain way. The world as apprehended according to its classes. And its classes are abstract. So actually, when we say of something, it is immaterial, it doesn't matter, that means it has no quantitative measure. It doesn't amount to anything. It doesn't add up to anything. It is unquantified. But at the same time, what we need in life is not so much quantity as quality. Mere quantity is absolutely abstract. But the quality, the essential taste, the flavor of life, the meaning of it, that's the important thing. There are ways of measuring qualities, but you always have to turn them into quantities. And say, well, the cook standing over the stew pot says, not quite enough salt. And so he puts in a little more and tastes again and says, now that's right. Now we could stand by somebody with a recording book and say, how many teaspoons did you finally put in? And now we've got the quantity in relation to how much pounds of actual stuff that you're cooking and so on. And we've got the quantitative abstraction corresponding to a taste experience, which is not an abstraction at all. So therefore, in order to bring a person back to the real world, you have to suspend temporarily your abstract thinking. Because it is through abstracting that you divide everything up into differences, that you get the notion that you are one thing and I am another, that you get the notion that events are separate from each other. Events are separated in the same way as minutes are separated. And we try to draw the line separating 1 minute from another on our watch dials as finely as we can possibly draw it, because we want to know now is the time the minute turns to another one. And those lines, by their very thinness, show you how abstract they are, how tenuous, filmy, unreal. They're the measures. And don't confuse the measure with what is measured. The real world that can be seen and felt without abstraction is the world in which you are not different from everything that there is, from the Tao, from the whole course of nature. But you've been taught, you've been hoaxed and wangled by people who chattered and explained and had already hypnotized themselves into a view of the world which is quite abstract, quite arbitrary, not necessarily the way things are at all. So Taoism, in common with the Hindus and the Buddhists, is a great advocate of intellectual silence. Not, mind you, of saying that the intellect is a bad show and that one should be an anti-intellectual. Not at all. Thinking is just as much part of the process of nature as a spider weaving a web. The spider weaves the web to be a net for flies. The mind weaves a web, again the image of the lines of latitude and longitude, to be a net for catching the universe. And that is fine, it does it. But there is something other than a net for catching the universe. And in order to find it, you must temporarily stop using the net. Just in the same way as if you want to hear what other people have to say, you have to stop talking. If you want to talk, you must also know what you're talking about. In other words, if words represent the real world, you must be open to the real world in order to translate it effectively into words. But we are simply not taught to do that. Most of us think compulsively all the time. That is to say, we carry on a perpetual interior conversation, fearing that if that conversation were to cease, we would cease, and in a way we would. And so the Taoists speak constantly of being thoughtless, of having an empty mind, so that you can communicate with the real world without distortion. I've pointed out constantly in this seminar that the Taoists exaggerate. They overstress things they're talking about. And you must allow for that. And so, when they say that a certain wise man was so quiet and so still that moss grew over his body, and that animals crawled over him without noticing his presence, and that his breathing ceased altogether, that his heart no longer beat, they are using fanciful imagery. But quite definitely, in there is a Taoist yoga. There are Taoist meditation practices, just like Buddhist ones. And it is even conceivable that the Taoists were the first people to invent yoga and exported it from China to India. Some Indian scholars believe that this is so. So, the first element of Chinese Taoist yoga is to stop talking to yourself. Don't explain the world. This was in direct conflict with the Confucians, who made a great point of what Confucius himself, Kung Fu-zi is his proper name, called the rectification of names, being sure that the language was in order, so that there wouldn't be confusion. But the Taoists said, how will you ever rectify names? You establish names by talking about them, and you explain them by talking about them. How will you then explain the words you use to talk about them and be sure they're fixed and in order, and so on? So, as Lao Tzu says, naming is the mother of the 10,000 things. He also says, no name, the nameless, is the origin of heaven and earth. So, one has to get to the nameless state, the non-thinking state, which is called in Chinese, Wu Nian. This Wu Nian, this character there, that far means now, and this means the heart-mind. And you put them together. Wu Nian means, Nian also translates remember. It also means equal to the Sanskrit word kshana, and kshana means an atom of time, a moment, an instant. See the world without dividing it into instants, or see it all as one instant, not many instants in series. That's what this is. Now, you will find, if you try, that it's a very difficult thing indeed to stop thinking. Doesn't mean you stop using your eyes and your ears and your hands and all your senses. But when you see a dog, don't say dog, but just see what's there. The Buddhists call this the state of suchness. Now you see, if I hold a conversation with somebody else, they hear my words and they get my meaning from the words. And we say, fine. What is the meaning of that situation? What is the meaning of the fact that I can convey something to you with words? Has no meaning at all. It's just something happening, like flowers go like this, and the water goes blub, 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 and the wind goes whoo. See? And so we are all sitting around here Listening to me talking, what does it mean? You know what I mean. But what does it mean that we're doing this? Look at it. You can see what it is. Well, just here we are, like that. And some people are watching baseball, and some people are watching television instead. Some people are sailing boats. Some people are traveling in airplanes. Some people are riding on buses. Some people are just picking their noses. But that, you see. Some people are playing music. And you know what that is? What's the meaning of music? Some music is made to have a meaning. It's what we call program music. You know, you hear all this, the cavalry is on the run. See? But when it's simply what the hell does that mean? This is going along, you see? This is marvelous. And the same way as the birds fly in the sky, and so on. What are they flying for? When the wind is high, the gulls all go way up. And normally gulls are supposed to be busy fishing and surviving and doing the really important things. But there comes a wind and they all start floating up there on the wind. I don't know, maybe there's some insect or something up there thereafter, but I don't think so. I think they just like to float on the wind. And makes it much easier to fly. And so you can begin to see the world in that aspect. That then at once you begin to realize it simply isn't important whether you succeed or fail. These are arbitrary standards of the good imposed on the world in the same way as we impose our patterns and our measures. Whether it lasts a long time, that there is the light, or whether it's a short time, so what? There's a lovely Chinese poem which says, "In the spring scenery, there is nothing superior, nothing inferior. Flowering branches grow of themselves, some short, some long. The morning glory blooms for an hour, and yet is no different from a giant pine that lives for 1,000 years." So that is the essential thing, to be able to see everything thus, because that's absolutely the root of Zen. And so when you truly see anything thus, silence. Lao Tzu said, "Those who know do not teach. Those who teach do not know." And yet he wrote the Tao Te Ching. So I am teaching, but I'm also non-teaching, because I enjoy the sound of my own voice. And it is not a way of trying to tell you something. It is not a way of hoping that you will get a message in the ordinary sense of the word. But I am playing with words, and so the sound of my voice is a great deal more important than what I'm saying. Do you get that? I have a friend who tries to get people to listen. And while he's trying to get them to listen by talking, he says, "Now, don't try to attach any meaning to the sounds you hear, just hear them. Same way with my voice as you hear it explaining this to you now." And this is the entry into the real world, where there aren't any distinctions, because all the distinctions are made by thinking. Nor is there, for that matter, any sameness. It is just the way it is. And that's the Tao which can't be spoken. So you may ask me, how on earth do you get there? Because I think compulsively and I can't stop thinking. Well, the point is that you mustn't start by trying to banish thoughts from your mind. That is, as the Taoists say, beating a drum in search of a fugitive. Or it would be as if, supposing the police were suddenly to raid this place because they suspected we were running a tantric love cult, and that the cars, as they approached, had their sirens on. And everybody would hear the sirens and jump into their clothes and all start looking respectable. See? So, in the same way exactly, if you try to stop thinking, you are thinking about stopping thinking. And that creates a great battle and confusion. So what you have to do is to let your mind think whatever it likes to think. But as it does so, become aware of the words that are going through your mind as a form of lalling. Listen to what anybody is saying to you as a series of noises. We can do this very easily while listening to music. When you really listen to music, you don't talk. You just go with it. And that's why listening to music is a form of meditation. Especially music which doesn't try to make you think. Now, some people can't do that. Their music will simply stimulate ideas, and they will think about this and that and not listen. But if you really listen to music, the sound of it becomes your whole mind. And so it's more difficult to do this with the visual senses than with the auditory sense, because we think with our eyes to an amazing degree. But you soon can learn to look without interpreting what you're looking at. Doesn't mean you don't see, you look. But the world can begin to look very different indeed when you look without naming and saying, that's a head, that's a face, that's hair, that's a hand. Because the moment you say it's a hand, you stop seeing the hand. Everybody has an abstract idea of a hand, sort of a five-fingered palm, you know? But you've never seen a hand. If you really look at a hand, and you suddenly, it stops being pink. All kinds of colors are there. And it becomes miraculous if you don't think about it. So, but as you cannot force non-thinking, you cannot force thoughts out of your mind. You simply listen to them in a new way and approach them in a new way. Thoughts are, as it were, unuttered noises in the head. See them that way. Words are vibrations in the air. Listen to them that way, as music. And slowly you begin to divest yourself of the interpretative system, the terminology, the value system in which you have been brought up to live as in a straitjacket.